Welcome to a video that I am very excited to film because in this video I am bringing you a list of my top 10 favourite fantasy series. I have been on BookTube for over 4 years and I've never done a video like this. I think it's because my brain really struggles to separate books that I read for the first time as a teenager or a kid and books that I read for the first time as an adult. So as an adult I didn't feel like I'd read enough fantasy to be able to put together a top 10 list until now. Also, I am very sensitive to endings, so if I don't know how a series ends, either because I haven't completed it or because an author hasn't completed it, then it's not going on my top 10 list until I know how it finishes. I know that some people disagree and that's fine, but just for me personally, I can only include completed series in my top 10 lists. Obviously, this list is not objective. It is not a list of the most popular series out there. It's a list of series that I feel best describe my own personal taste in fantasy. Saying that, one of these series is a dystopian sci-fi, but I haven't read enough sci-fi to put together a list, so it's going on this list. It's my list and my rules apply. So let's get stuck into the list, and I have tried to put these in some kind of order. In 10th place is The Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo, which is the only YA series that I have on my list. I always say that the Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo is the series that got me back into reading fantasy as an adult, and I think it's because the first 3 books have that nostalgic YA feeling that I didn't know I was missing from my life. So I read the first 3 books over a weekend, and then I immediately went into The Six of Crows duology, which does follow different characters even though it's set in the same world, and it blew me away. I thought it was so much fun, so compulsively readable, and the characters had this really interesting dynamic. It's basically about a group of people who are trying to pull off this heist, and I love a heist story, so it really worked for me, and I think it's a series that I would like to reread at some point just to see if I love it as much now, having read more fantasy. I would also argue that even though this is YA, I think I heard that the author wanted it to be published as adult. There are points where you have to really suspend your disbelief that the characters are as young as we're told that they are. That doesn't bother me, but just something that I wanted to mention if you are interested in this series and for some reason you haven't picked it up yet. In 9th place we have The Nightborn Duet by Carissa Broadbent, the first book being The Serpent and the Wings of Night. Now this is lower on the list because technically it is part of an incomplete series, and I know that I'm contradicting what I said earlier, but this series is actually going to be a series made up of duologies, and I have read the first duology, which is The Nightborn Duet, so I feel like I can count it as a favourite series, but it could go up or down depending on how I feel about the other series within this series. This is a fantasy romance series that is one of the few fantasy romance series that I've genuinely enjoyed, and I think it's because you can tell that the author has put as much effort into developing the world and the politics as they have into developing the romance and the characters. We follow this main character called Araya, who is the human daughter of the vampire king, and the first book is essentially a tournament that she's taking part in where the winner is going to receive a wish granted from the goddess of death. She has to team up with this guy reluctantly. They are reluctant allies, and it's really, really compelling. It's really fun. It's also brutal and intense, and it's dark, and I think that's why it worked for me. Also, it is the perfect slow burn. I don't like insta-love. I don't like it when characters fall too quickly, and I thought the tension between the characters was also written really well. So I'm very excited for more books set within this world. Even though these characters' story has now been wrapped up, I am very intrigued to see how the world and the politics continues to develop. Next up we have the Rook and Rose trilogy by M.A. Carrick, which is a series that I finished quite recently. I only finished the 3rd book a few months ago, so I'm still trying to work out my feelings towards it, but those feelings are generally quite positive, hence why it's made it onto this list. So the first book is The Mask of Mirrors, which follows a few different characters, but it's mostly a heist story where we're following this main character who is trying to infiltrate a noble family. So this city where this story takes place has quite a complex history because at some point in the past it was colonized, and now in the present day there's various groups of people who live there, and there's tension between these groups. If you liked the setting of Camor in The Lies of Loch Lamora, then this is kind of similar. It's not exactly the same, obviously, but it is a Venetian inspired setting. So the main mode of transport that people use to get around is the canals and the waterways. The characters are really interesting as well, and they have very distinct personalities. I don't hear enough people talking about this series, and I think it's great. So if you enjoy political fantasy that has really detailed and intricate world building with several magic systems, there are a few different magic systems that took me a while to get my head around, but once I was in, I was hooked. It also doesn't suffer from middle book syndrome. I think that the second book was actually my favourite in the series. Next up we have Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson, which I read a few years ago now, but I can still remember the ending of that series and how impactful it was, which if you've read anything by Brandon Sanderson, you'll know that he is well known for his endings and how impactful they are. And the ending to Mistborn Era 1, I think, is one of the best endings to a series that I've ever read. I still think about that ending all the time, and I really want to reread it at some point, but I need to read Stormlight for the first time first. I still haven't read Stormlight, so as it stands, Mistborn Era 1 and Mistborn Era 2 are still the only series that I've read by Brandon Sanderson. I have read some of his standalones as well. The way that I like to pitch Mistborn is that it's set in a world where the Dark Lord won. So many years ago, there was this Dark Lord that rose to power, and we're now seeing what the world looks like under this Dark Lord's rule. We're following this rebellion and this group of people who are rising up against the Dark Lord, and these people are allomancers. So the magic system within this world is based around ingesting metal, and it gives you magical abilities. What I loved about the first book was how it introduces us to the magic system, and we follow this character of Vin, who is learning that she is Mistborn, so she can ingest all of the metals and use all of the abilities, and she's being trained by this guy called Calcia, who is a more experienced Mistborn. So you have that mentor-mentee relationship, and what I love the most about Brandon Sanderson and why his works work for me, it's the logic. I am a very logic-based reader, and his books make sense. He has hard magic systems with hard rules, and I love that. It makes my brain really happy, so that's why I continue to pick up his books, even though I still haven't read Stormlight, but I will, I promise. Next up we have the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams, the first book being The Ninth Reign. Now, this series is a very difficult series to give a synopsis for because a lot of my enjoyment came from the world building, so I don't want to tell you too much because I think it's more fun to go into the book and find it out for yourself, but I'm going to do my best to paint a picture of what to expect. So this book is set in a world, this series is set in a world where knowledge has been lost. That is something that I really enjoy reading about. I think this kind of trope, if you could call it a trope, pops up in a few other series on my list, but essentially we are following a few characters in this present day timeline. One of these characters is a scholar who is trying to uncover the secrets of this world, and she is being helped in this mission by this bodyguard who is a type of vampiric elf. His race of people are at risk of dying out because they are being affected by this disease. There's also a witch that you're following who has this ability to create this fire, and that's all I'm gonna really tell you, but this is a genre blend. So even though I would categorize it as fantasy, it also has sci-fi elements and horror elements. It's one of the most unique series that I've ever read, and it's one that I think a lot of people should pick up because I think if you go in with no expectations, which is what I did, I picked this up randomly from the library after I'd seen a few people talking about it. I went into it with not really any expectations, and it ended up being a new favourite series for me. Next up we have the only non-fantasy series on this list, and that is the Earthsea Duology by Octavia E. Butler, the first book being Parable of the Sower. Now, the reason I wanted to include this series on this list is because first of all, it is a favourite series of mine, but also, even though it's a sci-fi dystopian, it reads more like literary fiction, so I feel like it would appeal to pretty much anyone. It was written in the 90s, 70s. However, it's actually set during the 2020s, which was very surreal. It's told through a series of diary entries, so I would recommend the audiobooks if you are someone who listens to audiobooks. I listened to both books via audio and I really enjoyed the experience because I felt like I knew this main character. We're following Lauren, who lives in California in one of the few safe communities that are left. So essentially in this alternative future or alternative present day, it's really difficult to explain, but essentially in this world things have fallen apart. So there's a water shortage because of global warming, the police and the government are corrupt, and vigilantes roam the streets. So it's not really safe to go outside anymore. I think if you like TV shows like The Last of Us and The Walking Dead, not because of the zombies or because of the mutant plant creatures, but because of the commentary on humanity and how humanity react in situations like this, I think this could really work for you. There's also a big theme around religion because Lauren sees the adults in her life talking about how they just need to get through it and then things are going to go back to how they were, but she thinks this is incorrect. She thinks that they should be focusing on the future and they should be adapting to this new normal, and she begins to form her own religion, and it becomes about her planning to leave this community to spread the word about this religion. Something else that I should have mentioned actually is that the main character Lauren has hyper empathy, so she can feel other people's emotions, and that obviously affects who she is and the way that she reacts to certain situations and her motivations. And I thought it was so cleverly written. It is quite dark and brutal in places, so I would recommend checking content warnings if you need them, but I thought this was fantastic and I need to read more books by Octavia E. Butler. I have already read Kindred, but I would like to read some more of her other series. I know that she has quite a few. Okay, so moving on to The Realm of the Eldlings by Robin Hobb, which is next on my list. And I know that some people are going to say I'm cheating by including this entire 16-book epic fantasy series just in one place. However, I am going to tell you my favourite series within The Realm of the Eldlings. I wasn't convinced that I was going to continue this series after finishing Assassin's Quest because I did not enjoy Assassin's Quest. I was very underwhelmed by the Farseer trilogy in general. However, I think I would think about it very differently now if I was to reread it, because I would be viewing it as a prequel to later books in the series that I really enjoyed. My feelings about the series all changed though when I read The Live Ship Traders, which is my favourite series within The Realm of the Eldlings. I gave every single book 5 stars and I really enjoyed my time reading it. I actually have an entire video on my channel where I talk about The Realm of the Eldlings, spoiler free, so if you are interested in my thoughts then I will leave that linked. But just in general, like some general feelings about this series, I thought that the world that Robin Hobb created was so interesting and she is incredible at writing complex characters. If you want to read a series to understand whether you like character-driven fantasy, then I would recommend The Realm of the Eldlings. Her characters are really at the forefront of the story, and I think what's great about this series is that even though it's 16 books long, you can take breaks in between series because her character writing is so strong. The plot almost doesn't matter, and it's not actually difficult to remember what the plot is because the plot is so insignificant in comparison to what's actually happening with the characters, and the characters are so memorable. It's not going to be a series for everyone because it is very slow and there are parts that feel a little bit tedious. However, I would recommend giving it a go because Robin Hobb has quite a distinct writing style. It feels almost like classic fantasy. That does bring us into the top 3, and kicking us off we have the Daevabad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty, the first book being The City of Brass. Now, I will say the first book in this series, even though I thought it was a good introduction to the world and the politics, I can see some people reading this and being put off by certain elements, specifically the romantic elements. I think if you read the first book and that is the only thing that you don't like about it, then I would encourage you to continue the series because it's probably not going to go in the direction that you think it's going to go. video, I loved how this had so many twists and turns, and it really subverted my expectations. It's historical fantasy, which is one of my favourite types of fantasy, and in the first book we're introduced to this main character called Nari, who is living in Egypt, and she is making a living as a con artist. So she does actually have this ability where she can look at someone and sense whether they have some sort of illness, but she uses this to her advantage to con people. And at the start of the book, she is performing a con when she accidentally summons a Jinn warrior who looks at her and thinks, "You're not human," and he sweeps her away to the home of the Jinn, and she ends up getting caught up in all of the Jinn politics. The setting is really well described and it makes you feel like you're there. It's almost got this romantic type of atmosphere, even though I would say that the romance is very much secondary to the politics and the plot. The characters are really interesting and well developed, even the side characters. This has so many memorable characters, and like I said, it really wasn't what I was expecting. It didn't go in the direction that I was anticipating, and it has these moments that made me feel emotional, but also these moments that felt really intense. I don't think it's faultless, and I think in the first book in particular you can tell that it's a debut. However, I think Shannon Chakraborty is an author that is going to do amazing things, and I get excited now for every new book that she publishes. I have just had to delete some stuff off my memory card because I have been rambling on too much, but we're almost at the end of the list. There's only 2 more series left to talk about, the first of which is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, the first book being the 5th season. So I read the 5th season for the first time last year and it was incredible. N.K. Jemisin writes with this intensity that really works for me, and I also really liked the writing style in this. I know that some people don't get along with second person POV, however I really like it when it's done in a certain way. I don't like it when the narrator is breaking the fourth wall and talking to me as the reader. However, if they're talking to themselves or to someone else within the story, then I can find that really draws me in. I know that when some people are looking to get into a new series, they want to know, is it more plot driven or is it more character driven? And I think this series falls into a unique category of books where it's not really either. It's more driven by its themes and its world building. Those are, in my opinion, the main strengths of this series, and it's why I enjoyed it so much. So if that's something that you're not going to get along with, then it might not be the series for you, but the world in this I thought was really unique and the atmosphere was incredible. It's set on this planet that is very unstable, so the people are very used to having to deal with things like volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and other natural disasters. There are people within this world who can control the earth. They have this magical ability, I guess you would call it. However, these people are not treated very well. There's a lot of prejudice against them. People are scared of them. Some people enslave them, and some people will just outright murder them if they come across them. The opening to this story is also very intense. So it opens with our main character finding that her husband has murdered their son and kidnapped their daughter, and it's about her journey to trying to find her daughter. You also get these other perspectives that build a bigger picture of this world and how brutal it is. It's a difficult read, and I understand why some people haven't got along with it, because it's not really a book that you read for entertainment or for fun. Motherhood is quite a prominent theme throughout the series, and I thought it was explored in a really complex and interesting way. Even though I'm not a parent myself, I still find it really interesting reading about characters who are a little bit older than you typically find in fantasy. I think the main character is in her late 30s or early 40s. And yeah, that's again something that I tend to look for in fantasy, is reading about characters who are not teenagers, because I'm in my 30s, and so I prefer reading about characters who, even if I can't relate to them directly, I appreciate seeing that different type of character. So would recommend this series if it sounds like your kind of thing. I have since read the Great Cities duology by N.K. Jemisin and also gave both of those books 5 stars. They probably would have been on this list. However, However, I didn't want to include multiple series by multiple authors, and I do have plans to read N.K. Jemison's entire backlist because her writing just really works for me. That does bring me to the final series on this list, and I'm going to be interested actually to see if anyone was able to guess this, but my favourite series at the moment is the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, the first book being Jade City, and I will say I gave every single book in the series 5 stars. However, I felt like the books got stronger as the series went on. Jade Legacy, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. It took me on a roller coaster of emotions, and I will never forgive Fonda Lee for certain things that happened in Jade Legacy. I should probably start by telling you what this series is about. So this series is set in a world, I should say actually the first book is set specifically within this city on this island, which is most well known for being the source of jade. So jade is a substance where when you wear it, it can give you superhuman abilities. Things like super strength or superhuman hearing, things like that. And there are consequences to wearing jade. So if you haven't had the right training, then you can become addicted to it, kind of like a drug. But there's also people who are immune to the effects of jade. We're mostly following members of this one family who lead this one clan that monopolizes the jade industry. There are 2 main clans within the city and then a few other smaller clans. Family is a big aspect to this series, and seeing the family dynamics, and especially because this series spans several decades, you get to see so many situations that this family have to deal with, and I thought the family dynamics were done really well. I've seen some people say that they didn't like certain characters in this series, and I would argue that you're not meant to. Like, there are some characters in this series that aren't even morally grey. They do bad things. However, I felt like the characters were so well written, you could understand every single character's actions. You could understand why they were doing certain things and why they were reacting in certain ways. It was my favourite thing about the series. I loved following these characters, and I loved the politics of the world. I loved how Fonda Lee was able to make me believe that this substance, jade, is super powerful, and as the series goes on, you see how other countries view this country and how they view jade. I could believe that jade was this powerful substance that everyone wanted to get their hands on, and I think that is really a testament to the author's writing. It flowed really well, it was well paced, and the atmosphere was incredible. So this is often pitched as The Godfather but set in an Asian inspired world. I haven't read The Godfather. I haven't watched The Godfather, so I can't really confirm that, but I thought this series was incredible. It felt so unique, and I am so excited to read whatever Fonda Lee decides to publish next. That does bring me to the end of this list and the end of this video, so thank you for watching if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these series and what you thought of them. Let me know if you have any recommendations based on the books that I've talked about in this video, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me. But otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye.